I am a drummer, but I got to admit, when it comes time to laying drums on my own cues, I don't reach for the drumsticks and a bag of microphones. Instead, I turn to virtual instruments. The challenge is creating realistic drum MIDI programming. We're going to be talking about that, as well as unpacking the drum programming on a recent rock cue on my week 25 vlog check-in. What is happening, YouTube? This is Dave Croft. Welcome to 52 Cues, where every week I am riding one cue for the entire year. This is week 25, or rather, we're starting week 26. This is the recap of the cue that I put together the previous week. This is a rock cue called Bangers and Thrash, and we're going to unpack that a little bit later in the video. If you want to skip over, you can hit the description or hit the timestamp in the description, and I've got a whole breakdown. So if you want to skip over the vlog bits, then you can get right onto the cue breakdown. But I'm going to be talking about rock drum programming, or just drum programming in general. But before we get started, if this is your first time, welcome aboard. I'm glad you found me however you found me. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It really does help composers just like you find the video. Also want to give a special word of thanks to my Patreon patrons whose support makes this channel possible. There's going to be a lot more information about my Patreon at the end of the video. So we are talking about realistic drum programming on the vlog today, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I am a drummer. I started drums in 6th grade, wanted to be a percussionist, and actually I wanted to be like a rock drummer, but I had to wade through like learning bells and timpani and all of that stuff. But I am a drummer and percussionist by training and by trade. And I think drummers make some of the best drum programmers for obvious reason, because they know what the drum should sound like, but even more importantly, what's physically possible on the drums. And so today I want to help kind of share some of my my philosophies behind drum programming in the hopes that it will help you create more realistic drum programming. And so there are 3 main takeaways that can help you be a better drum programmer. And they are: first, drummers don't have 8 arms. 2, work your velocities. And 3, simpler is better. So drummers don't have 8 arms, work your velocities, and simpler is better. Let's talk about the fact that drummers don't have 8 arms. And I think this is the chief sin amongst non-drummer MIDI programming. And the drummer has, in general, one arm or 2 arms and 2 legs. And what that means is that drummers can only hit 2 things at a time. And so if you're like on the ride cymbal and your snare drum is over here on the left, then you can't, or you shouldn't rather, start adding tom hits amongst all of those other things. It's one of the things that's possible in MIDI, but it's not physically possible. And I feel like we get into the uncanny valley, if you will, of drum programming, where something sounds, wow, there's too much happening here. We know what drums should sound like. And so when I hear like a crash or a hi-hat, a snare drum part, and I hear like an open hi-hat thing happening, but also tom fills and extra crashes and all of that, again, it's possible virtually, but it doesn't sound quite right. And so drummers don't have 8 arms. So really, you should only be hitting no more than 2 things at a time, as far as like crashes, toms, snare drum, and hi-hat, although you can kind of get away with left foot hi-hat stuff, or right foot if you're left-handed. And the other thing is that drummers, when they're playing, they have a ride hand, which is going to be keeping a steady pulse on something, usually when it's a groove. So whether it's a hi-hat crashing, or just kind of riding the crash, or the ride cymbal. But that's going to be their right hand in general. I'm just kind of assuming right hand drums, so because I'm a right-handed drummer. The left hand is pretty much going to camp out on the snare drum. If they're just like playing a groove, they're just camping out. Right hand on the ride or hi-hat, left hand on the snare drum. And that left hand is going to move during fills, but it's pretty much going to stay there. And if you think that way, the snare drum hand, the left hand, isn't going to be moving a ton around the kit, then that will yield a little bit more realistic result. But the other way that it can yield a more realistic result is, let's say that you're on the ride cymbal, the snare drum's playing here, right? If you were to hit a crash and then go over to the hi-hat, you wouldn't hit the crash and the hi-hat at the same time, even though you physically could. Like if I'm boom, bap, boom, bap, crash, hat. The hat's not going to come down until like beat 2. But what I'm not going to do is boom, bap, and then hit the hi-hat with my left hand, the crash with my right hand, and then switch back. That right hand ride cymbal hand is pretty much going to stay just doing the cymbals, if that makes sense. And I guess that's a way you can kind of think of it, is your one hand is going to be doing the cymbal work, the other hand is going to be doing the snare drum work. And so never the twain shall meet. You shouldn't have a crash and a ride, or a crash and a hi-hat happening at the same time, because that's not how a drummer is going to play it. Well, I should say that's not how I would play it. So you hit the crash, you're going to lay off the ride, move to the hat. If you're hitting a crash and then back to the hi-hat, then you're going to hit the crash and move back to the hi-hat. But you're not going to double that again. Drummers don't have 8 arms. Be conscious of how many drums you're hitting at one time. And that's the biggest step to creating realistic drum programming. The next step is work your velocities, especially if you're doing something that has any kind of nuance to it. You're working with, again, assuming you're wanting to create realistic drum programs and not artificial sounding like EDM or hip hop music, which is unapologetically sampled or artificial sounding. All right, we're talking about taking a virtual instrument like a contact instrument, or even like drummer, the Logic's drummer, the drummer plugin, or I've been using the Get Good drums, and we're going to look at the aggressive One Kit Wonder kit here in a minute. But these drum libraries, they have different sounds at different velocities. So the harder you hit it, then you're going to actually get a different sound out of the snare drum. So if you're playing a part, let's see, I think I can pull this up here. If you're playing a part that has, let me turn that up for you. If I'm playing something like that, then the snare drum, the softer I hit it, it's a sample of the snare drum being hit soft. Then, as I press into it, then I get into the rim shots. So if I'm playing all that kind of nuanced ghost note business, lay off the velocities. Pull those velocities back. Don't smash everything at 127. I mean, unless you're going. But even then, if you're listening to my hi-hat work, hard hit, soft hit, hard hit, soft hit, not. But you're getting those inner working notes. That working your velocities. Working your velocities if you have 2 kick notes in a row. Those 2 kicks. Think like a drummer. If a drummer is playing and they're playing with a single pedal, they're using a kick technique where they're kind of tapping one note and then they're pushing the second note down, especially if it's like a heel up technique. And I don't want to get into the weeds in drum technique, but it informs our programming decision, right? If I'm playing a pedal and I have my heel up, it's not all from the ankle. Drummers are going to be using their ankle as well as their hip and driving the note from their hip. So boom, bap, ba-boom, bap, boom, bap, ba-boom. Same working fills. Work the velocities around the fills. Now, if you're not sure what these should look like because you're not a drummer and you don't, understand, or you don't have any experience in drum technique, then if you're like, let's say you're in Logic, open up one of their drummer tracks, convert it to MIDI, and look at the drum programming because those are really, really good. Or if you have like a plugin like Superior Drummer or the Easy Drummer or the One Kit Wonder kits, the things from Get Good Drums that have drum program MIDI loops kind of baked into the plugin, then print a few of those and take a look at the MIDI. Not to like copy the groove or whatever, but to get an understanding of how these are performed. And the more you do it, the more you start seeing the technique starting to present itself. And then finally, the final tip I have for you on this little nugget is simpler is better. Especially if you're writing something that's groove based, meaning it's just kind of laying down a drum beat. Don't make it too busy. Don't make the kick pattern way too busy. You're going to wear out your drummer's leg here, but keep it nice and simple. There's a comic strip I saw that on one panel has a drummer like going, and somebody is saying, and the caption underneath it says, "Wow, you're amazing." And then the next panel has the drummer just going boom, bap, boom, bap. And the caption reads, "Wow, you're hired." And the same, I think, can be said about our drum programming. Is busier is not better, especially for production music. Keep it simple. Keep your drum parts simple. Keep your drum fills at phrase points. Don't add drum fills in the middle of phrases and that kind of thing. And that's a whole other concept and topic as far as when to fill and all of that. The short version of that is drum fills are musical navigational signals that happened at the end of the phrase that helps to tell the listener where we're going musically. So a big drum fill usually indicates that we are going to a new song section. A smaller drum fill can indicate that we're connecting phrases, right? But we're not going somewhere new. But keep your parts simple. If you're writing something that's groove based, that is 8th or 16th note based, don't blast 32nd note triplets just because you can physically program those things. Because a drummer wouldn't do those things. They wouldn't just be kind of keeping time and then all of a sudden around the kit. We've seen that video of the drummer at the wrong gig, like the wedding drummer guy who's just like freaking out, right? It's very entertaining to watch. But that guy's not going to get a call back. Unless, that's his band and that's the shtick. But we're not necessarily looking for shtick for production music tracks. So keep it simple. Don't get too busy with your drums. Don't get too busy with your drum fills. Keep your drum fills at your phrase points, keeping time 2 and 4 on the snare drum, that kind of thing. Obviously, the style of the cue that you're writing is going to do a lot to dictate what we're doing and what type of drum part you're writing. But think like a drummer. A drummer is not going to be blowing heat all over the groove. But you do these things, all 3 of these things together, right? Simplify your parts and not having eight arms. Make sure you're working the velocities so that if you have those inner notes, if you have those parts in the snare drum, right? A little busier, but because you pulled the velocity down, it doesn't sound too busy. This would sound too busy. But if I do this, then that's going to set into your cue a lot better. We don't have 8 arms. Work your velocities and keep it simple. So I hope that helped for you. Let's take a look at the recent rock cue that I worked in collaboration again with the incomparable Donnie Wayne Smith. This is a cue called Bangers and Thrash. Right, that was Bangers and Thrash featuring my personal guitar hero, Donnie Wayne Smith, another collaboration with him. And I've been just really enjoying working with him. And I've talked about it before and dealing or working with a collaborator. And I'll have a link to that you can check out the previous vlog check-in where I talked about working with a collaborator. And so we're working in the rock genre, the rock milieu, and that means that we're going to be using acoustic drum sounds. And I have just been absolutely in love with Get Good Drums One Kit Wonder. And here's why I like it so much is it just sounds great out of the box. And if you're not familiar with it, or Get Good Drums, it's a producer and a guitarist, and I think he's a drummer as well. Chris Get Good, I think, is his name, and created a suite of plugins that really are really easy to use, phenomenal sounds, and sound really, really good with very minimal processing. And the One Kit Wonder series is just that, very limited. You can't go in and like change the drums, you can't change the cymbals, and very limited mixing. I mean, the mixer doesn't even have like pan knobs. But it has parallel compression, master EQ kind of baked into it with presets that you can dial up, and it just sounds amazing right out of the gate. Now, I do have another pass of parallel compression on this that I have added. So I am using the one knob pressure by Waves. That's kind of like my go-to parallel compression. It's just easy. It's my kind of plugin, just a knob that you twist. And because I don't really have time or energy to spend hours dialing in, a drum sound if I'm looking to write, 2 or 3 cues a week. That's hundreds of cues. That really is going to slow me down. So the One Kit Wonder is the name of the game for me. They come in a couple of different varieties. This is the aggressive kit. They have the metal kit and a fusion kit, and those all sound really, really good. The metal is a little clicky and it's really fast, and so it hasn't really found a home in some of my rock cues. But the metal kit is going to work really well if it's really, just like it sounds. It's a really kind of metal cue with a lot of really fast kick drum action and that happening in that cue. So this is the drums isolated by themselves. And I wanted to bring up the MIDI region so you can kind of see my programming in action. And this is an example just right out of the gate of what I was talking about with my right hand hitting a crash and then traveling to this open hi-hat sound. Now I could technically do this according to my own rules of, the 8-armed drummer. But that's not the way a drummer's actually going to play it. The drummer is not going to go to both hands, hit the crash and the hi-hat and then switch over. Instead, what they're going to do is that right hand is going to hit the crash and then travel over to the hi-hat. And you can see those velocities in action there. It's not just bang, 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 bang. If I were to make these all the same velocity, I mean, that's okay, but this, it's pushing that quarter note pulse and the eighth notes, the offbeats, 1 and 2, and again, think like a drummer. A drummer is probably not going to just hack away, kind of like, like one of those wind-up monkeys, just no nuance to it. And so by adding these velocity changes, it adds the depth of realism. We have another instance here where the push is happening on the and of 4, and is hitting on the and of 4, and you can see that travel time from the right hand hitting the crash and then going back to the hi-hat. Now, if I were to put the hi-hat note right there, notice it's going to just feel a little busy, right? But without it, not only is it going to sound more open, but that's just not how it's going to get played. And so that and of 4 gets to kind of float for a moment. We have all kinds of velocity changes happening in the kick drum. And there is that right hand switches over. The left hand is camping out on that snare drum. The right hand's going to go over, hit that floor tom as it's moving in between. Now I could do that, and let's make it even more believable by putting a lower velocity. I could do this, but it's a little bit too much, because that would mean that the drummer is playing, and then they're either going to play the floor tom with their left hand and like cross under, or they're going to go open-handed, which isn't, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it sounds a little busy. But this is more believable by taking that hat note out. This is it originally. Without it, And then when I go to the crash and I'm really riding the crash, it's really hitting those quarter notes. Because the crash cymbal opens up really fast. Unlike, a closed hi-hat, which is really tight. And you have the half open hi-hat, which is what we have here at the beginning. All right, that's the hi-hat. But when you go to the crash, it's going to open, it's going to move a lot, and so you don't really hammer on the eighth notes. All right, so going into my next section, because it's kind of an ABA type of a form here. And so going into the closed hi-hat, and one of the things I like about this One Kit Wonder is not only do I have your standard hi-hat edge, like with the edge of a stick, hi-hat with the foot, and then hi-hat half open, it also has really tight hi-hat and all these different variations of the hi-hat pressure. And so when I need to go from half open to a really tight, crisp hi-hat, I get into this. So the hi-hat is playing the edge and a tip, which is a drum set technique where you're playing the edge of the cymbal and then your tip. So, and that's the drummer is hitting quarter notes like this. And the edge of the hi-hat with the edge of the stick, tip, edge, tip. And you're getting that pulse. And so I'm able to split it between these two sounds. That's why it's going up and down the octaves. And notice when I go to my double crash here, the hand comes off the hi-hat, hitting the double crash. Being really conscious of how long that open hi-hat stays. Because it's going to close whenever I hit the next hi-hat note. And now we're back to the original. Crash. Now we're back to this tight hi-hat part. So not only with these two hi-hat notes, not only is this a velocity thing, but it's also changing articulation. And so getting a really very realistic sound. And there is a double hi-hat hit here. You like my drum? Now we're coming into a little drum break. Just like the beginning. And you can see here, I actually broke my own rule here. This note should be removed because I have snare, floor tom, which is going to be nice, open. Drummers are going to be hitting just like that. Now, what I could do is maybe a foot splash, kind of get away with that, but that's not really what's going to happen. And then hit those crashes together. So put all that together, with the guitar parts. Speaking of guitar parts, let's take a quick breeze through this. We have the main hook. We have a darker and we have some kind of Rage Against the Machine type sounds. And then another layer of the hook. And then some bass, I should say bass. With another version of the hook. Some rhythm guitar elements. Some ostinatos. Ostinati, I think, would be the plural of that. I did add a heavier kind of impact crash sound here, along with a little riser. Can't overdo it. You don't want to overdo it. And then to really separate this breakdown from this breakdown, because it's essentially the same. It's like an A, B, A. Actually, it's kind of like a A. It's all the same type of material, 16-bar phrase. But to make that separate, I went all the way to the bass. And then to get out of this, just to give some edit points, here comes these big drum hits, crash, and then these we call them windmills. They're just like, you know, wild stallion chords here. A bass, a little sub drop right there on the downbeat, on the and of 4. Put it all together. Yeah, so like I said, we the arrangement here is really A, just using different gradations of energy, of layering to get my different song sections. But you still need to have an overall kind of form to it, which is, you know, hook, build, breakdown, hook, out. And even though it's all the same material, I have that going on with this. Intro, hook, a little bit, pull the energy back, build, even bigger breakdown where you're pulling the energy back, and then take it home all the way to the end. So that was bangers and thrash. I hope that was helpful to see. How do you program drums? Do you think like a drummer? And if you're not a drummer, what are some of the challenges that you've run into in writing your drum patterns? Just remember the 3 main tenets. Drummers only have 2 arms and 2 legs, no octopus drummers, 8-armed drummers. Remember, your velocities really, really matter. Don't pin everything at 127, and keep it simple. Don't overwrite. Just because you can put 30-second note triplets everywhere doesn't mean you should. So that's going to do it for me this week. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me for my week 25 check-in. Be sure to check in next week for week 26. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing the video. It does help other composers just like you find this channel. I also want to give a shout out to my Patreon patrons whose giving of their actual real money make this channel possible. Patrons are just $1. It's just $1 a month to be a patron of the channel. And not only do you get the satisfaction of helping other people see the channel and see these videos, you do get access to my weekly music production live streams. I do live stream every single week, and we did one of these cues with the drum programming just last week. So that's going to do it for me. Until next time, have an amazing week 26. Peace.